as we join Christian once again on his journey to the celestial city, you'll remember that he's now been joined by a fellow pilgrim by the name of Hopeful. And indeed, this man, Hopeful, will be with Christian for the remainder of the journey. And we're going to look at two very short chapters in this episode. And what these two chapters have in common is the theme of compromise. In each of these two chapters, Christian and Hopeful will find themselves tempted to compromise in some area of their pilgrimage. And in the first of these two chapters, the temptation to compromise comes in the form of money, or more accurately, the love of money. To start with, Christian and Hopeful journey through a very pleasant meadow called Ease. And then ahead of them stands a hill. It's called the hill Lucre. Lucre, of course, being an old word for money. And in that hill, we're told, there is a silver mine. It's enticing. There are riches to be found there. But enticing though it is also dangerous. And Bunyan writes, some of those who had formerly gone that way had turned aside to see it, but going too near to the brink of the pit, and the ground being unstable under them, it broke away, and they were killed. Some others were so injured that they could not to their dying day be recovered. And just at that moment, Christian and Hopeful see that there is a man standing in the road just up ahead of them, and he is called Demas. Who is this man, Demas? Maybe you're familiar with him. Demas was one of the Apostle Paul's co-workers in the gospel, but his ministry came to a sad end, and we read about him in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul says of him, Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Demas was compromised because of his love for this present world, his love of the riches that this world has to offer. And in Pilgrim's Progress, this character Demas encourages Christian and Hopeful to follow his example, to turn aside from the way in order to pursue earthly treasures. And he says to them, here is a silver mine, and some are digging in it for treasure. If you come, with a little effort, you may be richly rewarded. And initially, Hopeful is keen to follow Demas's advice, but Christian warns him about the danger of compromising himself for the pursuit of money. He says, I have heard of this place before. Many have been destroyed there. And besides that, worldly treasure is a snare to those who seek it, for it hinders them in their pilgrimage. Now, Demas tries to argue back. He says, it is not very dangerous, except to those who are careless. But he blushed even as he spoke. And Christian is resolute in his rejection of Demas's overtures. He says, Demas, you are an enemy to the right ways of the Lord. You have already been condemned for your own turning aside. Why are you seeking to bring us into the same condemnation? Furthermore, if we turn aside at all, then our Lord the King will certainly hear of it. And rather than standing with boldness before him, we would instead be put to shame. Well, on Christian and Hopeful go. They leave Demas behind. And then they notice something else on the road ahead of them, a kind of strange monument. They're not sure exactly what it is, but as they get closer to it, they realise that It is as if a woman had been transformed into the shape of a pillar. And they realize this is the pillar of salt, which Lot's wife had been turned into for looking back at Sodom with a covetous heart. Again, it's a story of compromise, of someone turning back from obedience to God because of their love for this world. And it has a great impact on Christian and hopeful to see where this kind of compromise will lead, but for the grace of God. And Christian says, my brother, this is a timely warning. It came providentially to us after Demas's invitation to come over to view the hill Luca. Had we gone as he desired, and as you were first inclined to do, we ourselves would probably have been made like this woman, a spectacle to behold for those who come after. What Bunyan writes in this short chapter clearly has the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 6 in mind. Paul says, "Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." How dangerous is the temptation to compromise our faith because of the love of money. We turn to the next chapter, and again we find here another temptation to compromise, but this time it's because of the love of comfort. Compromising because of the love of comfort. And this chapter starts in a very similar way to the previous chapter. Christian and hopeful are again travelling through a very pleasant environment. They are now walking alongside the river of God, the river of the water of life. And we read that they walked with great delight. They drank of the water of the river, which was pleasant and enlivening to their weary spirits. On the banks of both sides of this river were green trees which bore all kinds of fruit. The leaves of the tree were also good for medicine. It's a beautiful environment. It's almost a taste of heaven. It's the imagery of Revelation chapter 22. But the Christian life is not all like that. And as they journey on, they find that the path now separates from this river and takes them into much more difficult terrain once again. Soon, Christian and hopeful are becoming discouraged by all of the many difficulties that they are encountering, and they long for an easier route. They long for a more comfortable journey. And then they notice that just ahead of them, on the left-hand side of the road, there's a field called Bypath Meadow. And there's a stile which you can jump over into this meadow. And this time it's Christian who is tempted by it. It looks so much easier to walk in that meadow than to stay on the right path. And after all, the path in Bypath Meadow ran parallel with the true path. It wasn't like they were going miles off course, just a slight deviation in order to have an easier, more comfortable time of things. Well, hopefully he's not quite sure if this is a good idea, but Christian managed to persuade him. And so they jump over the stile into Bypath Meadow and they start following this easier route. And soon enough they find another man who is walking along that same path. He is called Vain Confidence. And they ask him, where does this path lead? And confidently enough, this man says that it leads to the celestial city. And initially, they're encouraged that even though they have left the true path and they have chosen an easier route and a more comfortable way of things, that still they will reach their destination in the end. But very soon, darkness closes in and a storm gathers. And this man, vain confidence, falls into a pit and was dashed to pieces. And Christian and hopeful realize the error of their ways. Difficult though it was, they should have remained on the true path. So they decide now to turn back and to find that true path again. But now the darkness is all around them and the storm rages. The flood waters have begun to rise. They are at great risk of losing their lives. And we read, Christian realized that it is easier to go out of the right way than to get back into it. They realize that they have no choice but to find a shelter and spend the night there and hope that soon they will find their way back to the right path. 2 short chapters, each warning us about the danger of compromise in the Christian life. Whether that is the temptation to compromise because of a love for money, or to compromise because of a love for comfort, or to compromise for another reason. That desire to find an easier path than the way that Christ has set before us. And it should lead us to ask ourselves, where am I facing the temptation to compromise in my own Christian life? And where, by God's grace, do I need to turn away from that temptation and stick to the true path?